So today, a very interesting story came out. It was by Reuters. They were able to obtain documents from the U.S. Army that President Trump has ordered the U.S. Army and now to find reliable rare earth supply from non-China sources. So there's been stories on this for a couple months now about the Pentagon looking at deals with Linus in Australia and some others. There was a story from August 28th about this, but today the U.S. Army announced concrete. Well, the Reuters has a government document. U.S. Army plans to fund construction of rare earth processing facilities, part of an urgent push by Washington, D.C. to secure domestic supply of the minerals used to make military weapons and electronics, according to a government document seen by Reuters. This is an article from Ernest Scheider. The move would mark the first financial investment by the U.S. military into commercial-scale rare earths production since World War II's Manhattan Project built the first atomic bomb. It comes after President Donald Trump, earlier this year, ordered the military to update its supply chain for the niche materials, warning that reliance on other nations for the strategic minerals could hamper U.S. defenses. Also, China, in a more draconian retaliation tit for tat, could try to hurt U.S. companies or the U.S. military by totally shutting down rare earths. If you don't think China's capable of this, they did this to a certain extent already in 2010 and 11. I believe they totally cut off Japan. This was over the Senkaku Islands, I think. There was a fishing boat incident, I think, around the Senkaku Islands, and China and Japan had a dispute over the islands and also the fishing waters. So there was rumors that there might be oil around that island, but also there was a fishing boat dispute because I believe a Chinese fishing boat may have been fishing in Japanese waters, and it caused like an international incident. And China immediately, overreacted, because this is what the Chinese government does whenever there's whether there's a tweet by the Houston Rockets general manager, the Chinese government always overreacts. This is their strategy. They always, retaliate a lot more than whatever the incident was. And they tried shutting off Japanese large companies, Japanese automakers. They were not allowed to get rare earths. So for a while, Japanese automakers, Japanese large corporations were scrambling to find supply. Back then, they tried doing one of the large Japanese companies, I think it was Toshiba, tried doing a large deal with Molycorp. Unfortunately, Molycorp, they spent billions of dollars trying to build out the Mountain Pass mine to make it environmentally friendly. And also, they spent a lot of money trying to vertically integrate. Not only at the mine site there, they built enormous processing facilities, very, very expensive processing facilities. You can see this on your chart there. I put that chart. This is from the Department of Energy, a presentation from 2011. So this explains how difficult it is in the rare earths value chain. It is extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily difficult, and it requires a lot of technical expertise, not only to mine and separate rare earths, to separate out to put it into concentrates and then go into rare earth oxide powders, but to go all the way up the value chain there to rare earth metals, rare earth alloys and magnet powders, and to rare earth magnets and the other innovations that are occurring with rare earths. It is very, very difficult. China they have a very large percentage of the technical know-how. There is a small amount of people that have the technical know-how in Japan compared to China. Now, Japan did invent a lot of the rare earth permanent magnet technology, but Japan has to import a lot of the rare earths. There's been stories coming out that Japan found over 100 years of rare earth supply underwater, but that's not economic anytime soon unless the Japanese government subsidizes it. And if you're familiar with mining in Japan, the permitting process is, from what I've heard from Nolan Watson, who checks the permitting process from all these different governments, is one of the most difficult permitting processes for mining in the entire world. So there's a lot of issues. Not only does China have almost a monopoly on rare earth supply, and they bankrupted a lot of the rare earth miners. This was done decades ago because Mountain Pass was initially the world's largest miner for rare earths. And then China was not environmentally responsible with their rare earths mining, and they destroyed the air, water, and soil all around their rare earths mines, and that bankrupted the American rare earths mines because they couldn't compete economically because they have all these environmental standards. Mountain Pass is on the California-Nevada border, and so it's technically in the state of California, so the environmental standards are even more strict than they would be in Nevada. Even though if you go visit Mountain Pass, you fly into the Las Vegas airport. So let me continue with the article. China, which refines most of the world's rare earths, has threatened to stop exporting the specialized minerals to the United States, using its monopoly as a cudgel on the ongoing trade spat between the world's two largest economies. That's their nuclear option, really, to do that. I don't think they will do that. They could. The odds, I think, are pretty low that they will. So China has almost a monopoly on the rare earth mine supply, but rare earths are really not that rare. The rarest rare earth is a heavy rare earth called dysprosium, and over a 2-year period for dysprosium, I think from like 2009 to 2011, there was, I want to say, a 3,000% spike in price in dysprosium. It went nuts. So dysprosium is important for rare earth's permanent magnet technology in the neodymium iron boron magnet. And dysprosium is the rarest of the rare earths, and its demand is also a lot. It has a large amount of increasing demand, and it's also the rarest of the bunch. But rare earth deposits are unique. They're very difficult to separate out, and the concentration, mining rare earths is very, very different than mining copper or mining gold or mining silver or mining iron ore. It's very, very different. Also, most people aren't aware of this, but there's a ton of thorium byproduct in pretty much all rare earth deposits. So if you're in Australia or you're in the United States, you have to get licenses and you have to have storage facilities for that thorium. So I love the liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor, and I think if there was actually sound, rational investment in a secure energy future, we would be investing into that as a country, and other modern countries would be making research and development investments into that. But the reality of the situation now with thorium is almost no one is making those investments into lifter. And so all these rare earth deposits, they all have to store the thorium byproduct. So the thorium is not being used, and it has to be, so it's not an asset. Thorium right now, when you're mining it and storing it, it's not an asset. It's a liability. It should be an asset. I like thorium. There's a lot of potential for it. It's extremely energy dense. There's so much we could do with it. You can't make nuclear weapons with it if you use the liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor. But unfortunately right now, mining rare earths, and you're stuck with all this thorium byproduct, and it's expensive. It's a liability. It's very expensive. And then you have all these other permits you have to get because thorium is radioactive. Okay, back to the article. Quote, the U.S. rare earths industry needs big help to compete against the Chinese, said Jim McKenzie, Chief Executive Officer of Ucore Rare Metals, which is developing a rare earths project in Alaska. It's not just about the money, but also the optics of broad support from Washington. The Army Division overseeing munitions last month asked miners for proposals on the cost of a pilot plant to produce so-called heavy rare earths, a less common type of the specialized minerals that are highly sought after for use in weaponry, according to the document. The heavy rare earths is mostly about dysprosium. And unfortunately for Mountain Pass, and Mountain Pass is a very high-grade rare earths deposit, compared to pretty much every other rare earths deposit on the planet. But unfortunately for Mountain Pass, the concentration of rare earths in their mining mix is almost zero dysprosium. It is one of the lowest concentrations of dysprosium of any rare earth deposit on the planet. Now, they do have very high grades there for all the other rare earths. So the deposit is economic compared to other rare earths deposits. But that's not the reason why Molycorp went bankrupt. They spent billions of dollars trying to vertically integrate. The mine wasn't on time and on budget. The management team was way too ambitious with their economic projections and all the things that they wanted to do. The industry in general can't really compete at all with China right now. So not only does China have control of most of the rare earth supply, it was over 90% they had of all the mine supply, but now that Lynas in Australia is online, and I think just in the last year or two, Lynas now they're mining at Mount Weld in Australia, they're mining economically. But there's been environmental protests at their separation plant in Kuala Lumpur, I think in Malaysia. There's been a lot of environmental protests. It's not Kuala Lumpur, it's Kuantan. I'm not sure if that's right outside of Kuala Lumpur. But they have an advanced materials plant in Malaysia that they built, and unfortunately there's been a lot of protests. So the company's gotten hurt in that regard. Also, I think Vladimir Putin, built a rare earth mine, a pretty large one, in the last 5 or 6 years because he wanted his own supply of rare earths for the Russian military. So I think really the Australian mine for Lynas and Mount Weld and the Russian mine are the two new sources of supply, and that's reduced China's monopoly on rare earths mining down, but it's an artificial monopoly. It's not a free market because China is subsidizing their rare earths. They don't have any environmental standards, at least in the past, and they've destroyed the air, water, and soil with all the toxic chemicals used to separate the rare earths all around the mine. The other part here, as you can see on your chart that I have on the screen, is the value chain. And China just has a lot more technical expertise. They have at many of their universities in mainland China, they have entire programs for separating out the rare earths and going through the value chain there for making rare earth oxides and rare earth metals, which is further up the value chain, and then powders for alloys, magnet powders and alloys, and then finally making rare earth permanent magnets and neodymium iron boron. So there's a lot of trained masters and PhD level scientists and graduates in mainland China. And unfortunately here in the US and in Europe, there's just not a lot of these programs offered to students. The Colorado School of Mines was supposed to have a rare earths program. They were talking about it in 2010 and 11, and I just went to their website before I started this podcast, and it looks like they decided not to do that. So the Colorado School of Mines was supposed to have an extensive rare earths program, and it got scrapped, I think, because a lot of the rare earths companies went bankrupt or stopped being able to raise capital, and then Molycorp going bankrupt set the industry back a long time. If you're not familiar with my interviews on the archives, I've interviewed a lot of the top rare earth analysts, people who got paid a good salary in investment banks to cover the rare earth industry full time, people with graduate degrees who were trained scientists who were involved in part of the rare earth value chain. So I've interviewed them. Most of the interviews were done in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, but they're there in the archives with John Hykeway, Hykwy, I think. He since left his analyst job, and I think he's running a startup company. But some of the main technical expertise in North America for the rare earths, I talked about this a couple months ago over the summer. Actually, it was 5 or 6 months ago, because I've been doing so many of these videos, I forget the exact time. But I talked about the rare earths industry and how China could use as a nuclear quote-unquote nuclear option, trying to ban rare earths from the U.S. and hurt U.S. companies. But I talked back then about the problem with technical expertise outside of China with the rare earths value chain. There's just not enough people. So South Korea has some experts at some of their large companies who can separate out the rare earths and do some innovations with it and make magnets. Japan has a good amount. Japan has supply issues, though. They have to import their supply. I do not think that deposit underwater will be online in at least a decade. It might even be longer than that. But the main innovation, the main rare earths value chain company is here in North America, and they are Neo Performance Metals. I've talked about them before. They're a Canadian company, but they have rare earths value chain manufacturing all over North America. They have 1 or 2 plants in Japan and a couple in South Korea and a couple in China. And that stock, since I talked about it about 5 or 6 months ago, has gone down a little bit, but they actually have a GAAP profit. They're generating free cash flow. They have really good intellectual property. They have almost a 4% dividend yield, and they have long-term contracts with Honda and a couple other large corporations to build their rare earth products. They're building a lot of Honda's rare earth permanent magnets for their electric vehicles and their hybrids. So they have a lot of things going for them. They have a lot of good intellectual property too. And also Neo Performance Materials, they were bought by Molycorp, and they actually did really well. I was looking through their investors presentation a couple months ago, and they did really, I was surprised at this. They did really well during the bankruptcy proceedings with Molycorp. And whereas the company that bought the Mountain Pass mine, I think, paid $20 million for the mine, even though billions of dollars were invested at the mine in Mountain Pass. But Neo Performance Materials, in my opinion, got the better end of that deal, because Neo Performance Materials got a couple extra rare earth value chain processing facilities in the bankruptcy facility from Molycorp, and they also got a bunch of intellectual property that Molycorp had done, and Molycorp had designed, using rare earths, a new water filtration product, and Molycorp was not good at selling it, and Neo Materials has the IP on that, and now they're selling it to water utilities and making profits from that. So they actually took advantage of the bankruptcy, shockingly. They have it's in the footnotes of their slide in their annual report, of some of their slide presentation in their annual report. So I don't know when that stock's going to go up. It's just my opinion, but you're getting paid almost a 4% dividend yield. They have a GAAP profit and free cash flow and good IP and some good long-term deals with large corporations, providing them with innovative rare earth value chain products. And they do throughout the value chain there. So they buy rare earth oxides, and then they do everything up through that. And as far as I know, that's the largest pure play in North America that does that. Anthony asks, didn't Japan find an underwater source of rare earths? Yes, they did. However, Anthony, as I explained earlier in the podcast, permitting for mining in Japan is an enormous hassle. Very expensive, many years. Not only it would be that if you were mining on land, underwater is even worse. So the odds of permitting that could be very low, and you're looking at least a decade, and it's probably not economic mining underwater, unless the grades are a lot higher, so it could be a lot more expensive. So unless the Japanese government, unless the Bank of Japan decides they want to print an extra 100 billion yen, $100 billion worth of yen to fund that, I'm not sure it's going to be economic. They could subsidize it, though. But what Japan tried to do in the past, Anthony, was they tried making a big investment into Molycorp, and they had supply contract deals for Molycorp to provide them with rare earth oxides from Mountain Pass. And then they were going to take those and they were trying to make neodymium iron boron magnets without as much dysprosium. So the inventor of the neodymium iron boron magnet, I believe, is actually Japanese. He's a Japanese scientist, and he's still alive. Real Vision TV, Justine Underhill did an interview with her. I'm not sure if it's out for free on their YouTube channel, but they did a special on rare earth metals earlier this year where Justine actually got to interview the Japanese scientist who invented the neodymium iron boron magnet. And that guy was supposedly working on a new type of magnet design that was going to use a lot less dysprosium, and I have not heard about that, any updates on that in a long time. So I don't think they have it done where the neodymium iron boron magnet is going to use a lot less dysprosium. The major issue is the dysprosium, because the demand for it is still strong. It's used in all these major rare earth products, and a lot of these rare earth mines do not have any high levels of dysprosium concentration. And that's why you have this story here about the U.S. Army looking for a heavy rare earth mine. Thank you for the super chat, Justin. Grizz35 TV says he wonders if China and the US will proxy wars over rare earth metals in Africa. It would be stupid to do so. There's not a great deposit with super high grade. Mountain Pass has the highest rare earth grades. The problem with the concentration of that deposit is it does not have dysprosium. It has very little dysprosium. Also, Mountain Pass will only, at best, I think the new CEO of this company, MP Metals, he's been on TV a lot, CNBC a lot, talking about how right now, Molycorp, after post-bankruptcy now, they're mining again, is only making rare earth concentrate, and how bad habit there, and how Mountain Pass has to ship the concentrate to China. They pay an enormous VAT tax. So it's not profitable for them to do so with the VAT tax, but they do it anyway just for revenue. And so they ship the concentrate to China because China has the only separation abilities right now. Neo Performance Materials can do some of it, but not on the scale. Neo Performance Materials is better after the concentrate is turned into rare earth oxide powders. So Molycorp, the plan now is to reopen those processing facilities that were originally built that they could not make economic from 2010 to 2013 before Molycorp went bankrupt. And the processing facilities, it is very, very expensive to take those concentrates and separate them into rare earth oxides. Now, you're making a lot more money if you can do it. If you can do it economically, you're going to mint money. Because the rare earth end users in the value chain will pay more money for it. But it is much easier said than done. Molycorp could not do it. Molycorp invested billions and billions of dollars. I want to say over $4 or $5 billion were invested by Molycorp into Mountain Pass to try to do it. And they were never on time and on budget. They kept throwing more and more money at it. And finally, it was really obvious with what management was telling in public and their investors' presentations, and they just kept raising more money, and the stock price looked bad. It was really obvious that that was a stock to avoid at some point. But the IPO for Molycorp did go up tenfold. I think I bought the IPO at $6 a share, and it went up to $60 at one point. Now, I did not sell all the way at the top, but I got almost 10 times my money at one point. I didn't get out all the way at the top, though, so I didn't time it perfectly, but I saw that there was a rare earth problem. Unfortunately, this is a problem with mining companies. They did, and when mines do not come in on time and on budget, and there was billions of dollars spent on Mountain Pass for Molycorp and other acquisitions that just did not work like management said. Anthony asks, can't Japan allow a multinational in to mine their underwater source? It's possible Japan could make an exception, but it's very, very unlikely given their environmental regulations and how anti-permitting they are for mining. Apparently, it's one of the toughest, if not the toughest countries in the world for a developed country to get permitting for mining. That's what I've heard. And underwater mining is, for the environmentalists will be fighting it. They'll be coming in from the US and Europe and the UK to fight that. Underwater mining is even worse. It's viewed as even worse by environmentalists than mining on land. So I wouldn't bet on that. Now, if the Japanese government makes an exception, they make an exception, but I'm just telling you what they normally do with mining and the permitting process. It's very expensive and it takes a long amount of time. But the Japanese companies do need, remember I said earlier in this podcast, 2010 and 11, Japan got screwed over worse than the US. So Japan was totally cut off from official rare earth imports from Japan. So China was not allowed legally to export rare earths to Japan anymore. It was over, I think, the fishing boat dispute in the Senkaku Islands, and it just, that international incident just got worse and worse. And Japanese companies then were buying rare earths out of China, smuggled rare earths out of China in the black market. So China then started cracking down, and I think a lot of people were going to jail in mainland China over this. It was a mess. Like, Even the Molycorp CEO was talking about the amount of rare earth smuggling back then. It was a very large amount of black market smuggling. And that's because of how expensive the rare earth prices were going. Some of these rare earth prices were up 50, 60, 70% in only 2 years. A couple of them went up 100% or more. And then dysprosium was the real gem. Dysprosium had an enormous price spike in only a couple years. Yes, I've seen the China Uncensored video on the topic, and I know way more than they do. I wrote a Dragon Metals report in 2010 on the rare earth market, and I studied all the companies. I looked at all the annual reports, all their investors' presentations, email management, looked at the project economics of pretty much all the rare earth deposits at the time. I spent like over 100 hours on it. And I've also interviewed over the years in the archives on my channel a lot of the top rare earth experts in North America. The China Uncensored one is a very basic. The CEO that's running Mountain Pass, I don't think he's being fully honest. And I think they're being way overly optimistic about how soon that Japanese underwater rare earth mine can come on. At best, Molycorp is only going to be able to have separated rare earth oxide powders, at best. If they can do that, they can make a lot of money. But the CEO is going on TV on CNBC and saying that they're going to be able to create all these other rare earth products. It's only rare earth oxides. Everything else, they don't have the technical expertise anymore. They don't have the facilities. Neo Performance Materials got their facilities in the bankruptcy proceedings. Neo was able to get those facilities in the rare earth value chain that Molycorp owned for very, very cheap. So if anything, the U.S. government should be negotiating a deal with Neo Performance Materials. Because they can actually do the really difficult stuff of value added. And they're the best in North America. They have the most facilities in North America and South Korea and Japan. I don't really like any of the rare earth miners. Now, these stocks on speculation may pop. People may buy these on speculation, but I was lied to by... I thought the investors' presentations for a lot of these rare earth companies back then, 2010-11, were extremely dishonest. There was unbelievably optimistic assumptions in all of them. Yes, just my opinion, Neo Performance Materials looks like a very solid company. They have a lot of things going for them. Free cash flow, GAAP profits, very good intellectual property. They did very well during the Molycorp bankruptcy. They added a couple processing facilities that Molycorp owned for pennies on the dollar. They got a new rare earth product that they sell, a new water filtration system using rare earths. That's a new product revenue for them, and they have a long-term deal with Honda and a couple other large companies for rare earth products. I don't know what the stock, the revenues were below expectations, but company looks very solid long-term. And they're actually doing innovation. Space mining will never happen. Yeah, let's just say it's decades away, and it may be decades away for a long time. It's more likely that we mine on the ocean floor, far more likely, but we can do that right now. We can mine on the ocean floor right now, but environmentalists are blocking it, and that's why you have like Nautilus Minerals go bankrupt, because Nautilus Minerals had found enormously high grades of copper, gold, silver on the ocean floor right off the coast of Papua New Guinea. The grades were unbelievable, and they never got their environmental permits. Eagle Claw Bullion says China is an environmental disaster from refining their rare earths with leached chemicals. Yep. There's videos on this, and there's a few documentaries. Rachel Jantel was studying to be a rare earth expert. I'm not sure at which university. There's not enough universities teaching this stuff. There might be some chemistry departments that have like a small subsector of it, but there's not programs. The Chinese universities have entire programs. Well, thank you, Kim. I appreciate it. Kim says, I'm the rarest of the analysts that can cover different topics like this. Well, it's through a lot of hard work. IBJI says the best and brightest students in the US used to want to become scientists. Now everyone wants to go into finance. Exactly. This is for the US to get really good at the rare earth value chain. The universities, more than just a couple universities, and it can't be a tiny little, 2-class program for a chemistry grad student or chemistry PhD. There has to be entire programs of this for material science, chemistry, engineering, geology, where you're learning all the different steps to the rare earth value chain. And this is what happened. This is how things are in mainland China. There's a number of universities in mainland China that have entire programs, full course load, teaching their students how to innovate all the way up the value chain and do all these things. And unfortunately in the US, and I don't think this is happening in Europe either, Japan might have some of this. Because there is some legitimately good innovation with rare earths, obviously because they invented the rare earth permanent magnet in Japan. So there is legitimately good innovation in Japan with rare earths, but it's just not here in the US, and it needs to. So that's a long-term solution. Short-term solution, it looks like the US military may be subsidizing a American rare earth mine. So if the US military gives Molycorp a contract, that would be good for the MP Materials company. MP Materials, which owns the Mountain Pass mine, and they might be able to re-IPO that back onto an exchange, and then the stock price may go up, but there would still be problems with them being able to source dysprosium, and then could they actually economically, on time and on budget, get their rare earth oxide processing facility up and running? Because Molycorp had billions of dollars back in 2010, 11, 12, and when they went bankrupt in 2013 to try to do this, and they still couldn't do it back then. And Linus has some issues too, because Linus's rare earth value chain processing facility there's an enormous environmental protest. I'm not sure what they've decided. They were talking about moving their processing facility to Australia, but there's also environmental permit issues there too. So this is a hypocrisy with modern society, because we need these rare earths for a lot of technological innovations, and then also with mining, everything that's not grown has to be mined. But then the manufacturers of these smartphones and others, they don't plan for any recycling. So we can do environmentally responsible mining. It can be done where people manufacture products and they can be recycled, but it's not being done. Or the permitting process is too long and too expensive, and no one wants to wait 10 years or more to build a mine if the permitting process is that difficult in another country. Albert says Belgian scientists can mine gold and silver from wastewater, yet not economically. There's like a bacteria that can produce it, yet it's not economic. Maybe if gold was over $5,000 an ounce, maybe it could be economic, but it's not economic anywhere near current prices. Okay, so I think I've covered a lot of this. Doubt you'll hear a lot of this stuff anywhere else. I do have a rare earths background. I've been covering rare earths for a while now, really since 2010 and 11. I was reading about it before the big rare earth price spikes, and I did buy Molycorp at IPO when it was $6 a share, and it got to as high as $65 a share. And then, they started having a lot of operational problems at Mountain Pass. And the mine, as I've talked about many, many times on my mining stock education lectures, real bad problems happen when the business plan of the mine does not come in on time and on budget. And Molycorp is one of those case studies where they had a pretty good business plan. The management team could not execute. They spent billions of dollars trying to get to rare earth oxide separation, and then also up the value chain. So at the Mountain Pass mine, they wanted to get to rare earth oxide separation, and then they were shipping they were supposed to ship the rare earth oxides, which they mined at a profit then, and separated at a profit, all the way up their other value chain investments into their other rare earth value chain businesses. Once they bought Neo Performance Material, it was Neo Materials at the time. I think they changed their name slightly. And they were supposed to make magnets. They were supposed to make magnets without dysprosium, and that didn't happen either. Any comments on the Fed meeting? I'm not surprised they didn't cut rates right now. Not surprised at all. I've said why. I've said the main reasons why the 3 rate cuts were done over the summer. Okay, well, that's it for today's live stream show. I want to thank my over 200 Patreon account contributors. Hopefully it'll be 300. Next 12 months or so, hopefully less. People step up for $5 a month. There's a good amount of content behind the paywall. There's a couple audio podcasts and a couple articles that are exclusive only for Patreon account contributors, my dozen or so monthly PayPal contributors, and people who tip me once in a while. It's much appreciated. So I can focus on content and analysis like this. Because guess what? The mainstream analysts are just going to say, oh, buy a rare earth mining stock. Buy a junior miner. And guess what? I knew what questions to ask the rare earth juniors back then because I was studying the industry, and they were lying to me too. They were lying on their investors' presentations. They were way overly optimistic. There was one rare earth junior that would not post how much capex on their investors' presentation, that it was going to cost like over $2 billion in capex to build their rare earth mine, and they could barely raise like $10 million. So they were putting out all these cool investors' presentations and press releases, and they were leaving out of a lot of their materials. You had to spend a lot of time looking for what their cost estimates were to build a rare earth mine, and that rare earth stock went up a lot, but there was no way they were going to raise like $2 billion or more to build their rare earth mine. And of course, this was predictable. Once rare earth prices crashed, then that stock crashed, and I don't even know if they're a rare earth company anymore. Because like so many of these rare earth companies in Vancouver, and it's almost always companies out of Vancouver. So many of these rare earth juniors out of Vancouver, they pivoted pretty shortly. Once Molycorp went bankrupt, basically no one else could raise capital. Linus, Great Western Minerals also went bankrupt. That management team was, they made like a $10 million or $20 million investment into restarting a mine in South Africa, and supposedly they never disclosed this. One of the contractors just stole the money, and the management team was hiding this. They didn't disclose it for, I think, 6 months after it happened. And then a number of the high-level executives left the company before this was disclosed. So it was a big scandal that came out later. This is why I don't like a lot of mining companies dealing with this stuff, juniors, especially juniors, because you don't know what's really going on there. And I know what questions to ask the management teams and what to look for in the footnotes and the investors' presentations and the financial disclosures and stuff like that, and they could still hide this stuff. So I think a lot of those rare earth juniors, after Molycorp went bankrupt and Great Western Minerals went bankrupt, I think a lot of them couldn't raise any more capital, and they just pivoted. They bought like a deposit in graphite, or they switched to marijuana, or they started doing ICOs. So that's the supply chain. Hopefully you can see it there on your screen pretty well. You go from mining to rare earth oxides to metals to alloys and magnet powders, then to magnets and other rare earth innovative products. And these rare earth permanent magnets are used in a bunch of things. Defense applications, they're used in hybrids, they're used for motors in cars. All the different electric motors, like in the window that moves your window up and down, they're used in a bunch of some of these cars have like dozens and dozens of these rare earth permanent magnet tiny little motors. They're in smartphones, they're in so many different things. So the Chinese saw this coming decades ago and they subsidized it, and they did have a full monopoly. I think 10 years from now, I think the US could be a lot more competitive in the rare earth value chain, but it really has to start at the university level with kids who actually want to learn how to do all these things. So there has to be students who want to learn the value chain. And Chinese universities are the ones that are teaching all the different steps, and it's just not occurring. There's not enough universities teaching this, and there's not enough students in the US who want to learn. Okay, that's it for tonight.